De Niro looked up, his weathered face softening. "What's your name, kid?" he asked, his voice low but warm, like the crackle of logs in a fireplace. "Eli," she replied, gripping the book tighter. Her voice trembled, but her eyes held steady. "Eli," he repeated, nodding. "What should I write?" She took a deep breath and blurted out, "What does God mean to you?" The bookstore froze. Whispers died, someone coughed, another scoffed. A man behind her, Henry Crow, a gray-haired retired lawyer in an expensive coat, muttered, "A kid asking about God? Seriously?" Ruth, Eli's grandmother, spun around sharply. "She has a right. You don't." De Niro raised a hand, silencing the murmurs. His gaze locked on Eli. He leaned closer, a spark of curiosity in his eyes. "That's a big question, Eli," he said, but his tone wasn't patronizing. He spoke as if she were his equal, as if her thoughts carried the same weight as his own. "You're asking because you want the truth, right? Not the one in books or churches, but the one inside." Eli nodded, her heart pounding. She expected him to brush it off or say something trite, but De Niro leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping the table. "God, Tome. It's not some bearded guy on a cloud," he began, and a depth in his voice made everyone in the room listen. "It's those moments when you feel bigger than just you. You know, when I held my daughter for the first time? It was like the whole world stopped, and I knew there was something more than me, more than my movies, more than all this." He gestured around the bookstore. "But there's other times, too. God is when you're on set, and every move, every breath, is perfect. It's not me acting, it's something moving through me." Eli blinked, her mind buzzing, trying to grasp his meaning. His words weren't simple, but they resonated with something inside her. The crowd listened, holding their breath. Even Henry, who'd been grumbling, stood silent, his brows raised in surprise. "And another thing, Eli," De Niro continued, his voice quieter but piercing. "God is when you see injustice and don't stay silent. Like you right now. You could have just asked for an autograph, but you asked something that made everyone here think. That's God, having the courage to be yourself." Henry couldn't hold back. "Philosophy for kids? Come on, let's move, we don't have all day." De Niro's eyes slid to him, narrowing, but his smile lingered. "And you, mister, what do you say?" he asked, his tone calm but challenging. "What's God to you? Or are you one of those who thinks they know everything?" Henry flushed, his lips tightening. "I don't believe in fairy tales," he snapped. "The world runs on reason, not fantasies." Eli turned to him, her eyes flashing. "If there's no God, why are you so mad about my question?" The crowd gasped. Ruth pressed a hand to her mouth, hiding a smile. De Niro laughed, a short, raspy, genuine laugh. "She got you there," he said to Henry, winking at Eli. Henry stepped back, muttering under his breath. Eli felt her cheeks burn with triumph. De Niro took her book and started writing, his pen scratching the paper. "Don't stop, Eli," he said, handing it back. "Ask. Always ask." She opened the book. It read, "Eli, God is in your questions. Keep searching. Robert De Niro." As Eli stepped away, the bookstore buzzed again. People whispered about the girl who wasn't afraid and the actor who answered like it was the most important conversation of the day. Henry lingered in line, but his confidence wavered. And Eli clutched the book, feeling this was just the beginning. "Sweetheart, he's probably exhausted," Ruth said softly, adjusting her scarf. Her voice was gentle but laced with concern. "We got the autograph. Maybe that's enough for today." Eli shook her head, her curls bouncing. "He didn't say everything, Gran. I know he wanted to say more. I can feel it." Ruth sighed, but pride flickered in her eyes. Her granddaughter was as stubborn as she'd been in her youth. They waited, leaning against the brick wall, watching the last visitors leave the bookstore. Henry Crow, the grumpy lawyer, passed by, shooting Eli a sidelong glance. He still looked irritated but stayed silent this time. Finally, the bookstore door creaked open, and Robert De Niro appeared. He wore a dark coat, its collar shielding his chin, and carried a leather bag. His bodyguard, a burly man in a black suit, walked ahead, scanning the alley. De Niro looked tired, but his stride held the confidence that made him seem like a character from his own films. He spotted Eli and Ruth and paused. The bodyguard frowned, but De Niro waved him off. "Still here, Eli?" he asked, his voice raspy but warm. He smiled, the wrinkles around his eyes deepening. "What? The autograph wasn't good enough?" Eli stepped forward, her heart racing. She wasn't scared, but she felt this moment mattered, more than she could explain. "I want to ask again," she said, her voice soft but clear. "What does God mean to you? You started to say something, but I know there's more. Please, tell me, like I'm grown." Ruth glanced at her granddaughter, surprised but silent. De Niro raised an eyebrow, his gaze piercing. He studied Eli for a moment, as if weighing whether she could handle what he'd say. Then he nodded slowly and pointed to a wooden bench by the alley wall. "Come on, let's sit," he said. "This isn't a 5-second talk." They sat, De Niro in the middle, Eli on one side, Ruth on the other. The bodyguard stood at a distance, keeping watch. The alley was quiet, only the distant hum of the city reminding them they weren't alone in the world. De Niro reached for a pack of cigarettes, but, glancing at Eli, slipped it back into his pocket. "You're not afraid to ask," he began, his voice low, almost a whisper, but each word carried weight. "That's rare. Most people your age. Hell, any age, just take what they're told and don't dig deeper. But you dig, and I'll tell you, Eli, it hurts. Because the truth about God, it's not a pretty story. It's a wound that never heals." Eli froze, her eyes glued to him. Ruth clasped her hands in her lap, feeling the air grow heavier. De Niro leaned back against the bench, his gaze drifting somewhere between the brick wall and the evening sky. "I grew up in New York," he continued. "Italian family, Catholic church every Sunday. Candles, incense, prayers in Latin. They told me God was the one who sees everything, judges everything, loves everything. But you know what I saw? A father who worked himself to death and then drank to forget. A mother who prayed for him, but nothing changed. Friends who died on the streets because they fell in with the wrong crowd. Where was God? I asked that at 15, at 30, at 60. I'm still asking." He paused, his fingers tapping the bench. Eli listened, holding her breath. His words weren't easy, but she felt their weight, like he was opening a door to a world she was only beginning to understand. "When I was younger, I thought there was no God," De Niro said, his voice softer. "The world was too cruel, too dirty. I saw people steal, lie, kill, all under the banner of religion. But then I started acting. And there, on set, I felt something. You know, when you play a role, really play it, not just recite lines, you kind of disappear. You're not Robert, not Travis Bickle, not Vito Corleone. You're the moment. And in that moment there's something. Sacred. I can't call it anything else. It's like music you hear, but can't touch." Eli leaned closer, her eyes shining. She didn't understand it all, but she felt he was telling the truth, not the kind in books, but the kind that lives in your bones. "For me, God isn't an answer, Eli," he went on. "It's a question. It's when you look at the world and ask, why? Why am I here? Why is that kid hungry? Why won't this war end? Why do I feel joy when I hold my granddaughter and pain when I think of the ones I've lost? God isn't the one giving explanations. It's what makes you search. And you know what's scariest? You'll never find the end. But every step, every question, that's God." He looked at her, his eyes serious but warm. "I've seen a lot, Eli. Fame, money, failures, scandals. I've lost people I loved. I've made mistakes I'm still paying for. And every time I fell, I asked, where the hell are you? But then I got up. Not because I'm strong. Because something in me wouldn't let me quit. Maybe that's God, the spark that doesn't go out, even when everything around you is dark." Ruth let out a quiet sob, her hand trembling. She hadn't expected the old actor's words to hit her so hard. Eli sat silent, her mind buzzing. She hadn't gotten a clear answer, But she felt De Niro had given her something more, a map she could follow herself. "And what do you feel when you think about God?" she asked suddenly. De Niro laughed, short, raspy, but genuine. "You don't let up, huh?" He rubbed his chin. "I feel a mix, joy and pain. Like when you hear a good song, but know it'll end. I feel gratitude for my kids, my work, for still being here. But I also feel anger, because the world's unfair, Eli. And if God's there, he lets it be. I don't know why. Maybe because he wants us to do something about it." He fell silent, his gaze distant. "When I was your age, I thought God was someone who'd save me. Now I think God is what I do when I decide not to give up. It's when I help a friend, when I tell the truth, when I forgive myself for what I can't change. It's not in churches, not in books. It's here," he touched his chest, "and here," he pointed to her heart. Eli nodded, her eyes glistening with tears she didn't shed. She felt like he'd given her a key, not to an answer, but to more questions. De Niro stood, his joints creaking softly. "Don't stop, Eli," he said, resting a hand on her shoulder. "Ask, search, and don't be afraid if there's no answer. The search itself is enough." He nodded to Ruth, who whispered thank you, and walked to the car waiting at the end of the alley. Eli watched him go, clutching the book so tightly her knuckles whitened. She didn't know what came next, but she felt that this evening had changed her forever. The subway was crowded. It smelled of damp clothes and cheap coffee from paper cups. Eli sat by the window, staring at her reflection in the dark glass. Her thoughts buzzed like a swarm of bees. De Niro's words about God as a question, a spark, a search, wouldn't let her go. She felt like she'd been given a map, but didn't know where it led. Ruth noticed her pensiveness and asked softly, "What's on your mind, sweetheart?" Eli turned her head, her eyes shining in the dim light of the train car. He didn't give an answer, Gran. "But I'm not upset. I want to know more." Ruth smiled, her wrinkles deepening. "That's life, Eli. Not answers, but questions. You're brave for asking them." The next day, Eli went to school with new energy. Her classmates, as usual, chattered about social media and video games, but this time their jabs about her too smart questions didn't sting. She sat at her desk and opened her notebook, jotting down thoughts swirling from her talk with De Niro. "God is a search. But what am I searching for?" she wrote, underlining the words. During social studies, the teacher, Mrs. Harris, an older woman with a gray braid, spoke about civil rights and injustice. Eli listened closely, and suddenly her hand shot up. "Mrs. Harris," she said when called on, "if people fight against injustice, could that be part of God? Like searching for something better?" The class went quiet. Some giggled, but Mrs. Harris smiled, her eyes sparkling with interest. "That's a profound question, Eli." "I think so. Fighting for justice is a way to seek meaning, to connect with something bigger. Want to expand on that?" Eli nodded and began speaking about how De Niro described God as a spark that doesn't fade, as the courage to ask and act. Her voice grew steadier, and even classmates who usually ignored her listened. One boy, Tim, who often teased her, raised his hand and asked, "Wait, so you're saying God is like when you do something cool?" Eli laughed, and the class joined in, not mockingly, but warmly. "Maybe," she said, "but it's also when you're not afraid to be yourself, even when it's hard." Mrs. Harris nodded, her face glowing. "Eli, I want you to write an essay on this, and maybe share it with the class. What do you say?" Eli agreed, a warmth spreading in her chest. She hadn't changed the world, but she'd made others think, and that was a start. Meanwhile, Henry Crow, the grumpy lawyer, couldn't shake the bookstore memory. He sat in his plush office on a skyscraper's top floor, gazing at New York skyline. His career had been successful, but recent years felt empty. Eli's words, "Why are you so mad?" and De Niro's response gnawed him like a pebble in a shoe. Henry didn't believe in God, but for the first time in ages he wondered, what got him up each morning? Why had he snapped at a child? He picked up his phone and dialed an old friend he hadn't spoken to in years after a falling out. When the friend answered, Henry said, "Listen, I was probably an idiot back then. Want to meet up? Talk." It was a small step, but he felt a relief he hadn't expected. Weeks passed. Eli wrote her essay, and it became more than a school assignment. It was a way to make sense of the world. She read books on philosophy, religion, history, not to find God, but to understand what people seek. Her grandmother Ruth supported her, and in the evenings they watched old De Niro films, laughing and crying over his roles. One day, flipping through a local paper, Ruth found an article about a charity event where De Niro was raising funds for kids from poor neighborhoods. She showed it to Eli. "Look, he's doing what he talked about," Ruth said. "Helping. Maybe that's his God." Eli nodded, her eyes shining. She took a sheet of paper and began writing a letter to De Niro, not to get a reply, but to say thank you. "You said God is a question," she wrote. "I don't know what I'm searching for yet, but I won't stop. Thank you for showing me how to ask." The letter went unsent, but Eli wasn't upset. She knew her questions, and the answer she'd find would be her path. New York kept humming. In the pages of Time bookstore, new visitors browsed books, unaware of the conversation that had changed a few lives. Eli didn't become famous, Henry didn't transform overnight, and De Niro went on with his life. But each carried a spark, the one that makes you ask, search, believe in something more. And maybe in that was their God.